Everybody, glad you could join us for another Red Letters series this week. Make sure that before or after this class that you watch Jeff's class that he gave last week called It Is Finished, and different things that Jesus says in the Passion narrative, specifically on the cross, that just have a really big impact, maybe even in the way that you see God and your relationship with Him. Really powerful, transformative stuff. So I encourage you to take a listen to that. I think it's about 13 minutes long from last week. It's going to be another short one this week. What I actually want to do is take us right before the Passion narrative, really the beginning of it, to where the chief priests are taking Jesus from Caiaphas to Pontius Pilate's house in this conversation that he has there. And that's going to be in John 18. So let's go ahead and just read a couple of those verses together here. That's going to be John 18, starting in verse 28. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. So this took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate is a career politician. He knows that what he's got to do is just try to appease as many people as himself. He cares mostly for his own power and position. And he wants to stay in that position, and he knows the way that he has to do that is simply by keeping this region under control. He's got to keep everything from blowing up. That's his only job. And so he's got to appease these Jews that he's in charge of, and at the same time exercise the authority and the control and the power of Rome through him over these people. In this little passage right here, John reminds us again that it's Passover, right? There are unblemished lambs who are being brought to the temple for sacrifice to atone for the sins of all the people. That's going on right now as Jesus is having this conversation with Pontius Pilate. But this really ironic thing that John says in here is that these priests, these Pharisees, they don't want to go into the palace because it belongs to a Gentile. They're not supposed to go into a Gentile's house before Passover, because then they would have to do all these purity rituals in order to take the Passover. Just kind of the irony in that statement. I like some versions that say something like they didn't want to defile themselves, or they didn't want to become polluted, so they remained outside. That would be like me getting ready to make dinner for my family, and before I start touching the meat and the vegetables and the fruit and everything else, I very religiously scrub and wash my hands with used motor oil and chicken blood. Just doesn't make any sense. And John is pointing out the irony here. Just shows how far that they've dragged away and really what they mutated God's law into, how far away they had brought it from the heart of God. Now they're trying to use their own law to kill God in the flesh. Just dripping with irony, right? But imagine I'm invited over to someone's house, maybe to your house. You've been preparing, getting ready for this dinner all week long. You've put your heart and soul into it. And as I'm pulling up to your house to partake in this meal, I'm pulling up into your driveway and I see your pet cat. And I know it's your pet cat. But I run over it, and then I walk inside, because I don't like cats. But I walk inside with my chest up high and my chin up high and say, I have done you such a favor in getting rid of that cat. It was evil and terrible, and you should not have been messing with it in the first place. Now, where's all this food? I'm going to go to your counter and to your stove, just start piling up my own plate. I'm going to go sit on the couch and prop my feet up and turn the TV on and start eating this food that you've been slaving away all week to make me. Just the gall here of these chief priests and Pharisees and Sadducees, and just the irony of what John is painting in this picture. Let's read the last 7 verses here of John chapter 18. So start in verse 33 with me. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" And Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into this world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. So kings in those days, as they knew better than we do, were all powerful. They were supreme. They cared mostly about themselves and preserving their own power and their own dynasty and their own name. And how back then did you become a king? Well, if you weren't immediately underneath the king, you weren't, his son or nephew or something like that. If you're not part of the family, and sometimes even if you are part of the family, the way that you gain power is through violence. That's how you overthrow the previous king and get yourself on the throne. Judas Maccabeus, 200 years before Jesus, through bloodshed, defeats the Syrians, right? And the Jews make him the king of the Jews, and a dynasty is started in his name. 30 years before Jesus, you have Herod the Great, who defeats the Parthians through bloodshed out to the east. 30 years before Jesus, and he is made king of the Jews by the Roman government, who is ultimately in control. Pilate knows that he has no time to deal with a bloody revolution. He doesn't want to deal with that. He's got to keep this area under control and under wraps. So he comes right out with it and says, "Are you a king? Are you pretending to be a king? Are you trying to be a king? What's the deal?" And of course, as Pilate found out, just as many people before him, oftentimes you ask Jesus a question, you get a question in return. Sometimes I wonder how frustrating that was for people. But Jesus says, "My kingdom isn't from here." If it was, you would see something very different than what you see right now. Peter learned this lesson right before this episode when they take Jesus out of the garden and Peter chops off Malchus's ear, and Peter rebukes him with the same sort of message. That's not how my kingdom works. I suspect that today he would rebuke a number of us today, not for chopping off people's ears, but spiritually something just as, or maybe even more serious, for times that we have presumed in our day and age and in our culture that force and exercising power and authority over other people is ever a way that God's kingdom is advanced in our time and in our day. But Pilate latches onto this kingdom phrase that Jesus says, and he's like, aha, I caught you. So you do think that you're a king. You do want to be a king. He thinks that he's cornered him and trapped him. And what Pilate doesn't know, and just again, the irony here is that Jesus has been building toward this moment for, like he says, it's this reason that I was born. I am causing everything to happen right now. You're a pawn in God's plan, and Jesus is working out God's plan. This is what he's been working toward. But he says, those on the side of truth, listen to me. To which Pilate, responds, what is truth, right? But truth isn't something that politicians or mathematicians or philosophers or professors, have the corner of the market on. It can be studied, right? Truth can be studied, but truth can't be known without being in relationship, because truth is in Jesus. Jesus is the truth. And Pilate and the high priest, they can't understand this. This is basically a different language to them. They can only see through their worldly filters, where as far as they've ever experienced, as far as they've ever known, truth is what the person in charge says it is. And you become in charge through force and through violence and through stepping on the people that are underneath you. And it's simply my truth versus your truth, and let's fight to see who wins. My power versus your weakness. It's their decision to grant freedom to a criminal while staying in bondage to their own sin. And even in the moment, Jesus forgives them. And as he dies, like all these other lambs that are dying over the Passover, he sets us free completely and perfectly, as Hebrews says, free from our bondage to sin. Just have a couple of questions that I want us to consider together as we're going through this season where the most powerful people in the country and arguably the world debate on stages and yell and all of that at each other and purport their truth against someone else's truth. You've got people on street corners who are waving flags and waving banners, holding up posters, trying to get you to hate the same person or the same group that they hate. Can you find and see Jesus in that person? Both in that person and in the person or the group that they're raging against. We have a culture and a society that markets hate every chance it gets, because hate is what gets people worked up, and getting people worked up sells more ads or gets more votes or whatever. Can you see Jesus in those people on both sides? Will you treat those people as they are Jesus? Or will we as Christians fall in line with the rest of world history and earthly kings who supposed that power and influence and control was the most important thing to acquire by stepping on the people underneath them? Will we as Christians get sucked into an attitude of looking down on others who, actually, I'm not going to qualify that statement, just period. are we going to get sucked into an attitude that looks down on others without qualification, no matter who they are, what they've done, what they believe, how they vote, fill in the blank? Are we going to get sucked into an attitude that looks down on others while paying lip service to a Lord who, though he was in very nature God, didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but took on the very nature of a servant, empties himself, humbles himself, and became obedient even to death? To look down on others, especially our Christian brothers and sisters, while worshiping that God, is to be invited to his table, to his banquet that he's put on for us. And as we're driving up to the house, running over his children in our car, in the driveway, in the front yard, so that we can be first in line at the front of the table to get served. What does someone who is on the side of truth do and act like? Especially now when power and control is being wrestled and fought for. I think we look at Jesus here and we have to admit that Jesus relinquishes status. He embraces humility, doesn't play this whole control and power and influence game, but rather he lifts others above himself instead of putting himself above others. I just hope that there's something in that message in this season for us right now. Maybe we can be in prayer about that, all of us together. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week. God bless.